Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Ethan couldn't sleep. His life had been eventful lately. But what had happened today? It just didn't make sense. How is that possible? Ethan realized he was smiling again. Wow! He'd long ago forgotten about that orphan boy. The orphan boy, the one who'd ended up in his ward, but fate had turned around. The street lamp shone brightly through the window, so that every object in the ward was clearly visible, including the half-empty box of chocolates. Ethan himself had forgotten that he had once adored these candies, and he hadn't seen them on sale for a long time. But there was a man on earth who remembered his little weakness and even found the box to please Ethan. So everything was not in vain. The penny wages, delays at work, and hard labor. Sometimes he wanted to quit his position as a doctor in the district hospital and go to a more monetary job, but something kept stopping him. Ethan couldn't leave his colleagues and patients. He just couldn't. He scolded himself for it, but continued to stay at his post. Even when a childhood friend opened an automobile workshop and called him to be an administrator, offering a good salary, even when his wife called him a loser, even when his daughter was born and the four of us in a 2-room apartment became cramped. It seemed to Ethan that leaving his position as head of the pulmonology department was tantamount to betrayal. He joined the hospital right after residency. At first, he worked under the supervision of an experienced doctor. Then he began to manage patients himself, and gradually it became clear that Ethan had developed some kind of sixth sense. He had a special instinct that helped him diagnose and select the right treatment. A special category of patients were children. Actually, there was a special department for young patients, but it was often overcrowded, so the small charges came to Ethan's floor. Now such cases have become isolated, but earlier, when the hospital was smaller, children came to Ethan's floor regularly. And just today, being in the unusual role of a patient himself, Ethan remembered one of his little patients, a boy of about 12 to 13 years old from the orphanage, who came to the hospital with pneumonia. Of course, he remembered it for a reason, of course. There had been 1,000 patients in his department over the years of his work, of course. You can't keep everyone in your memory. But Daniel was special and reminded of himself in a very surprising way. Ethan was still a young specialist at the time, but already respected and authoritative. His opinion was considered. He was consulted by more experienced colleagues. By that time, Ethan realized that he had chosen the right path: pulmonology. People with various diseases of the respiratory system, blue lips, pale skin, the man over time learned to distinguish his patients from afar, saw them on the street in shopping centers and parks. Ethan made diagnosis, developed appropriate treatment regimens, and put them into practice. Carefully approached each case, and people began to breathe again. The patient's quality of life changed dramatically for the better. The doctor felt great joy when he saw that the former patient was healthy, full of strength, happy, a tremendous return. Unfortunately, not all stories ended well. Ethan immediately noticed patients who did not have much chance of recovery. He recognized it in some subtle way, signs. Daniel, the boy from the orphanage, was one of them. Ethan saw the teenager being processed in the emergency room. Daniel had been brought in by 2 women, the local internet medic and one of the caretakers, apparently. They were answering questions. The admitting nurse was filling out paperwork, and on the couch, with his back against the wall, sat Daniel, thin, pale, dark blonde bangs falling almost to his eyes, spiky shoulder blades. The boy was taking his temperature, his t-shirt tugging at the thermometer sticking out of his armpit. Ethan didn't like the look in the boy's eyes, a dull, indifferent look that said he was very sick and the chances of recovery were slim. Ethan still remembered how his heart had shrunk with pity for the boy. He decided that he would do whatever he could to get the young patient out. Then there was the examination. Temp under 40, saturation critical, lungs wheezing, labs showing severe inflammation. Ethan was outraged. How did the orphanage bring the child to such a state? Why didn't they seek professional help sooner? The local nurse fed Daniel with useless pills, antipyretics, painkillers, even cough medicine she gave him, but he got worse and worse. Now the boy's situation was critical. X-rays showed pneumonia with extensive lung damage. The young patient was transferred to the intensive care unit, connected to a ventilator, began to administer the necessary drugs. Daniel either fell asleep or lost consciousness. Ethan sat next to him and looked at the skinny teenager, so pale, almost blending in with the white hospital pillowcase. Very young and no longer wanted by anyone. It was evident in his faded gaze and general lack of grooming. An orphan? What can I say? Life in an orphanage is certainly not sugar. Ethan was afraid to leave the boy's side that night. It seemed that in his absence the worst might happen. The child's condition was too unstable. The ward was quiet that night. Old patients were already on the mend, and there were no new arrivals. The nurse on duty looked in several times, offered the doctor to go to the restroom, to lie down, a little, to drink tea. He refused. He could not leave Daniel now. He felt it was dangerous, and he was worried for a reason. At about 4 a.m. the boy got worse. He turned blue, wheezed, and all this without regaining consciousness. Ethan immediately, without a second, called for the help of an on-duty resuscitator, and the two of them, several tediously long minutes, brought Daniel back to life. The kid was breathing again. The beeping of the instruments was steady, as it should be. Ethan exhaled with relief. It was gone. The doctor didn't leave his post until morning, even though he felt that the crisis was over, that the boy was no longer in danger. Daniel's chest rose and fell evenly. At the thought of what would have happened if he hadn't been there at the critical moment, Ethan felt sick to his stomach. He and his wife had recently had a son, a cheeky, funny-looking baby, Mason, now sniffling peacefully in his crib. He and Margaret had surrounded the newborn with love and care, giving him plenty of warmth and attention every day. It seemed that all this is vital for the little man. Mason literally blossomed from their smiles, hugs, warm words, and this Daniel, how does he and others like him live? The boy was in the intensive care unit in the most serious condition, and the adults were to blame for it. By the way, for not sounding the alarm in time, and it was almost 9 a.m. Ethan would soon have to make his rounds, and then hand over his shift to his colleagues, and no one had ever called to ask about the boy's condition. Ethan looked at the boy with pity. It seemed to him that his cheeks had turned a little pink. Just a little, of course. He still had a lot of healing to do, but the crisis was over. There was a chance that he would be all right. Ethan couldn't resist ruffling the young patient's blonde hair. Daniel's recovery had been slow and difficult. The damage to his lungs was very extensive. The boy had difficulty breathing, and he coughed to the point of nausea at the slightest physical exertion. The child was temporarily removed from the ventilator, but the transfer to a regular ward was too much to talk about. Every now and then the kid's saturation dropped sharply, and we had to give him oxygen. Ethan spent a lot of time at the bedside of the little patient. They talked for a long time, if Daniel's condition allowed it. The boy's story about his life in the orphanage shook Ethan, an adult, to the core. Above all, the indifference of the staff was surprising. For example, One day, Daniel told in a mundane tone that he was being bullied by several older teenagers from the orphanage, robbed of food, forced to clean their beds for them, and to be on duty, just clinging. Tripping, insults. Once they even beat Daniel for disobedience, quite severely and brutally, and all this with the tacit consent of the caretakers and nannies. Daniel recounted these egregious incidents simply and naturally, as if they were commonplace, a matter of course. He was not alone in this situation. In the orphanage, it was the norm that the older ones hurt the younger ones. There are those who offend, and there are victims. For the children of the orphanage, it was natural, habitual routine. There was nowhere to wait for help. The educators turn a blind eye and advise them to deal with it themselves. But how can a physically thin, not strong boy stand up to a crowd of big, angry teenagers? The orphanage staff also invented humiliating punishments for the most seemingly innocent misdemeanors. For example, Daniel once knelt in a corner in the corridor, in his underwear for half a night, just for drawing after bedtime, with a flashlight under a blanket. This was noticed by the duty teacher, and got very angry. On the antics of older and strong those who can already fight back, the staff turned a blind eye. They were allowed to do anything, but on the weak, the adults came off at full speed. From the stories of Daniel, Ethan concluded that the educators banally take out their anger on the children, compensate for their own powerlessness. This, of course, is scary. Daniel did not complain. Ethan learned about the horrors of being in the orphanage by asking leading questions. The boy told about his life, his existence in an even tone. For him, it was all familiar, natural. The boy did not know that it could be otherwise. One day, Ethan couldn't stand it and wrote a letter to the city administration without mentioning names and surnames so as not to frame Daniel. In this note, the man told about what was going on in the walls of the children's institution. Ethan heard that after his appeal, a commission came to the orphanage. Checks were made. The pupils were questioned. Had anything changed then? The doctor did not know the exact answer to this question, but he really hoped that he had helped the little children and Daniel in particular. Gradually, a special, very warm, trusting relationship developed between the patient and the doctor. The boy looked forward to Ethan's arrival in the intensive care ward and smiled at him every time, even if he had no strength at all. The man tried to make the boy laugh, cheer him up, told him anecdotes and funny stories of his childhood. He asked him to get well soon because a dolphinarium had come to town and the orphans would definitely be taken there. So Daniel had to be in line by the end of the month. One day, when Ethan went to check on Daniel as usual, the phone rang in his robe pocket. His wife was calling. Margaret had asked him to buy some milk for her and had disconnected. Was that Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata? Daniel inquired. It was, he asked at the ringtone. Beautiful music. You know your classics. Ethan smiled. Are you interested? Or maybe they teach music in your orphanage. I didn't always grow up in an orphanage. Answered the boy. Yes, and I understand that you were transferred there from the maternity hospital. I saw something like that in the documents, or am I wrong? You're not wrong. My real mom gave me up right away. I don't know her and I don't know why she did it, but I was really transferred to the baby house, right from the maternity ward. Ethan's heart squeezed at the thought. He had recently picked up his wife and tiny son from the maternity ward. Guests, balloons, a sea of colors and smiles, relatives and friends joyfully welcoming the new member of the family. It was such an event, such a celebration. The man could hardly hold back the tears of happiness. For the first time, bent the corner of the envelope and looked at the wrinkled red face of the baby. Many beautiful pictures remain from that day, and when Mason grew older, he would look at them with interest. And Daniel, how was he? Probably lying alone in the ward of refuseniks. They say that such children do not even cry. They understand that no one will come to them anyway. And then, wrapped up in a gray blanket, the boy moved to the baby house, where he was hardly very happy. After all, the appearance of a new child in such an institution means for the staff only an increase in the number of worries. I lived in the orphanage, Daniel continued, remembering almost nothing about that period of my life, and then I was transferred to an orphanage. And from there, when I was about 4 years old, I was adopted by a man and a woman, rich. We lived in a big house, even had a swimming pool. At first, Daniel felt like he was in heaven. The new parents did a lot to educate the child. The boy had a music teacher who gave him piano lessons. His father taught the boy to swim, and now, almost every day, Daniel had a swim in his own pool. The child was taken to the city for soccer lessons. Daniel did not like the training, but not to upset his parents, he pretended to be delighted. And he tried very hard to be praised by coaches and teachers. Let his parents know that they had chosen him for a reason, Daniel. He wanted to be the perfect son for them, or they might bring him back. Daniel had his own room, spacious, stylishly furnished, closets bursting with toys and clothes. That's my mother. She loved to go shopping with me, the boy recalled. My father worked all day long, and here she is. With her, we sometimes spent many hours in a row in shopping centers. Most of the time, we had one of her friends with kids around my age with us. It was torture, to be honest. Daniel didn't share his foster mother's love of shopping. He tried on suits in the clothing departments without complaint. He waited for his mother when she picked out outfits and bags for herself, sat in cafes listening to his mother's boring, long conversations with her friends. He was sent off to play with the children of his friends on the playground, but Daniel could not get along with them. For some reason, the children teased him, insulted him, pinched him, and all this in a sneaky way, and their games were boring and uninteresting. The boy avoided contacts with these so-called friends as much as he could. His mother noticed something wrong and reprimanded her adopted son, calling him an outcast and other incomprehensible words. The mother's displeasure was the most frightening thing for Daniel at that time. He wanted to feel loved and needed. He wanted to give joy to his foster parents, and when it did not work, he was upset and very afraid that he would be taken back. Daniel hoped that time would pass and he would be loved, but the years passed and the situation did not change on the face of the foster mother. More and more often appeared half-squeamish expression when looking at her son. She quickly grew tired of him, tried to avoid communication by all means. The father, he was almost absent from the child's life. The man was constantly working to provide the family with a comfortable existence. He noticed his son only when he achieved any success. For example, Daniel received his father's sincere praise when he won a music competition at school, performing the best in his age group, a difficult piece, or when only once, Daniel was recognized as the first player of a soccer match and awarded him a gold-plated statuette. The father, glowing with pride, took pictures of his successful son and put his arm around the boy's shoulders. The rest of the time, the man just didn't notice Daniel. Ethan listened and wondered. Daniel had been adopted. He'd grown up in a family for a while. But in fact, nothing had changed for him there. The same indifference, the same dislike. Only the setting was different. A palace with a swimming pool instead of shabby gray walls. She didn't know I could hear, but I did. Sharing my feelings with Ethan Daniel, the boy's voice trembling. It was obvious that the boy had never told his story to anyone, and now he was relieved to be able to tell it to someone who cared about him. She is mine, not a real mother. She told my father that I irritate and tire her, that she can no longer see me, that I am capricious, that I bore her. Wow. What did he say? He said there's no going back, and that she shouldn't whine, especially because I'm almost always handled by the nanny, not her. And that a child wasn't a toy to be played with and left behind, and his mother had rebuked him, saying that he wasn't particularly eager to hang out with his son, and so on. Daniel remembered that one day anger settled in him, and he began to do terrible things to piss off the foster mother, to see on her face some emotion, indifference, coldness. The boy couldn't stand it any longer. From a docile and calm child, Daniel turned into a devil. He deliberately broke and damaged things, rude to adults, stopped obeying their instructions. Once he shook the contents of his mother's purse right into the pool for refusing to take him to a birthday party. It wasn't that Daniel wanted to go. He just needed an excuse for another prank. His mother had beaten him for the first time, slapping his cheeks, slapping his back a little lower. It didn't hurt at all. He'd gotten it worse at the orphanage. Daniel laughed in her face and was surprised to see fear in the woman's eyes, in addition to anger and annoyance. She was afraid of him. That's how she discovered him. More on that next. Daniel poured into the sink the contents of the beautiful bottles of his father's bar, ruined with Scissor's designer dress mother, in which she was going to go to the corporate party to her husband. He let the family's favorite parrot, Jocko, out of his cage. The bird flew off to an unknown destination and never returned. Scattered garbage from a bucket all over the house, poured paint into the pool, trampled some flower beds in the garden. Daniel invented more and more pranks to piss off his parents, to draw attention to himself. He got punished for it, but the boy wasn't afraid of punishment. It was like he was possessed by a demon. I think I was getting back at them then. Ethan confessed to Daniel, "I'm ashamed of my behavior now. It wasn't their fault that they couldn't love me, but I was so disappointed. All my dreams of a loving, happy family were shattered. I tried so hard to please them. I tried to make music and go to soccer. This hateful went to and tolerated shopping trips. But they, especially her, they looked at me like something unpleasant, unnecessary. So I took my revenge on them." Daniel was taken to the doctor, preceded by a serious conversation between the couple. The boy heard everything from his bedroom. "What doctor?" The father was indignant. "So that everyone thinks that my child is abnormal?" "Yes, you just dissolved it. Not for nothing you cannot have children of their own. You just do not know how to communicate with them. I told you motherhood wasn't for you. No, you wanted a doll for yourself. That's it. Now you've got it, so raise it instead of going to the salons. He is crazy." My mother screamed. "You're never home. Can't you see what he's doing? And if one night he'll just send us all to the other side of the world. Didn't you think of that?" The parents argued for a long time. They talked about Daniel as a problem to be solved. They weren't frightened by their son's condition and didn't really care about his fate. The father did not want a child with a diagnosis in the family. The mother, on the other hand, hoped to get a diagnosis and send the unwanted child to the hospital, at least for a while, to breathe free. And that's when I clearly realized what a burden I was to both of them. Daniel shook his head sadly and realized that they didn't need me, that they would never love me, so he calmed down, accepted the situation, decided to take it as it came. Ethan Shivers, Daniel was about 7 years old then, a very young child, and already such problems, such thoughts. Daniel left his antics, but it was too late. His mother took the boy to a doctor, a paid one, a very expensive one, who was determined to fulfill any wish of the client, and the mother's wish was absolutely clear. and get a diagnosis so that she could legally dump the boy where he came from, in an orphanage. That's how I became a mentally unhealthy person. Daniel said words that were not appropriate for his age. My mother screamed at the head of the orphanage that they had given them a crazy person and promised to deal with them. And I was assigned a health group with which usually no one takes children in the family who needs such a big child, and even with a frightening diagnosis. So now I live in a boarding school. I can't wait to grow up. Do you want to become an adult sooner? Asked Ethan, shocked by the young patient's story. Of course they are children. That is, we are weak, defenseless, powerless. Nobody counts us. Adults are different. When I am big and rich, I will definitely take a child from an orphanage, or even 2 or 3, as many as my wife allows, and I will be a real dad to them. I'll always talk to them and fulfill their wishes. Ethan smiled. Daniel, in spite of what he had to endure, was not embittered. That boy had a surprisingly good heart. He'd been betrayed twice, he'd had a hard time in the orphanage, and he didn't even hold a grudge against his foster parents. On the contrary, he was grateful for a few years spent in their beautiful, rich house. It was only there that I realized I had talent. Daniel smiled. His breath was getting short, and his lips were turning slightly blue from the long conversation. Ethan noted these warning signs and prepared to call the nurse for oxygen, but he still wanted to finish the conversation, especially since Daniel himself was interested in it. What talent have you discovered? I draw well, especially buildings, constructions. I see. I immediately grasped the essence. Even when I was very young, I was able to draw 3-dimensional images. Even my mother praised me. Here, let's get well soon. We'll transfer you to the ward. I'll bring you pencils and a sketchbook, and draw me something to remember. Okay, sure, Daniel promised. Ethan left the room and thought about it. The boy's condition had stabilized, but the light, too extensive lesions. A drug, very expensive and rare, was needed for recovery. Without this drug, irreparable things could happen to the child. The same day, the doctor contacted the orphanage management and explained the situation. Treat with what you have. The head of the orphanage cut him off. Our budget does not include such items. You understand, the lung damage is so great that there is no way without this medicine. I will provide all the necessary reports and documents. Push for funding. The drug is necessary and urgent. It is not included in the list of those paid from the budget. The superintendent stood her ground. Ethan hung up. Everything was clear with them. Nobody needed this pale, russet-haired Daniel, the artist. If he suddenly disappeared, perhaps nobody would notice or be upset. Complete indifference to the fate of the pupil. Trying to get something from the administration of the orphanage is like banging your head against a concrete wall. Ethan tried to apply to the fund for helping sick children, but even here he met an obstacle. The man never fully understood why, but the fact that Daniel is an orphanage resident played against him. The boy is under the care of the state, which means that it should pay for his treatment. Funds collected money for treatment of only domestic children, family children, a terrible injustice. Total indifference to Daniel's fate depressed Ethan. The boy was getting worse and worse, and the relief was temporary. Standard medications were no longer working, and Daniel was put back on ventilator. The boy was melting every day. Ethan could not bear to watch it, and the man made up his mind. He withdrew the money he had been saving for a new car and bought drugs for Daniel without even consulting his wife, because Margaret, although she was a kind, warm-hearted woman, would not understand or approve of this act. Ethan decided that he would make amends. Gradually, he would save from his paycheck and accumulate the necessary amount, but Daniel could not wait. At the hospital, Ethan explained to his colleagues that he had found a rich sponsor for the boy, and only one nurse, the elderly Clara, knew where the money actually came from. She happened to see a receipt for the payment, which showed the name of the account holder from which the money had been debited. Ethan smiled and put his finger to his lips, saying not to spread. The old woman nodded and hugged the young doctor, who himself, being in a bad financial situation, decided to save the boy from inevitable death. Daniel recovered quickly on the new medication. Soon, Ethan, with relief, transferred the patient to a regular ward. The boy had fun. He was happy to communicate with the medical staff and other patients. Laughing a lot, Ethan looked at all this and realized he had made the right choice. If it wasn't for the medication, none of this would have happened. No Daniel smiles, no fun games, no amazing drawings. Ethan kept his promise. He brought a sketchbook and a set of colored pencils to the kids' room. That same day, Daniel found the doctor on the floor and demonstrated the drawing. Ethan did not expect such a thing. In front of him was a surprisingly accurate image of a piece of the street, seen from the window of the boy's room, a wide boulevard, the building of a shopping center, passers-by hurrying somewhere. You drew this yourself? Of course I did, Daniel answered, clearly pleased with the doctor's reaction. Wow, you really are a talent. When Daniel said he was good at drawing, Ethan had envisioned something a little different. He'd expected a beautiful, but still childlike and primitive drawing, but here it was as if a professional artist had done the work. The shadows, the light, the volume, the image looked surprisingly lifelike and realistic. Did someone teach you? Ethan asked, still not believing his eyes. Did your foster parents take you to art school? No. Daniel shook his head. They wanted their son to be a star soccer player, not an artist. And in the orphanage we have drawing, but it's boring they put a vase in front of you and tell you to draw. I draw what I see and what I like. You have to study. You have to study. Do you hear me? I'll talk to your teachers. Thank you. Maybe they'll listen to you, because they want me to study to be a tiler. After the 9th grade, I heard, and I dream of being an artist or even an architect. I like to design buildings. An architect? Ethan grinned sadly. I don't think that would be a career for a kid from an orphanage. There's no way he's going to get into architecture schools, and no one will pay for his studies. It was a pity. The boy was really very talented. Christmas was approaching. It was obvious that Daniel would have to spend it in the hospital. He had a long recovery ahead of him. The boy was glad of that. He liked it in the hospital. He got along well with the locals, and he was especially reluctant to part with his new friend, Ethan the doctor, the first adult who had ever cared for him. Ethan realized that he had grown attached to the boy. Of course, he couldn't do that, but he couldn't help it. After the hospital, Daniel would have to go back to his old life, full of danger, punishment, indifference, and cold. The man wanted to give this boy at least a little warmth and care as long as he can do it. Therefore, the doctor decided to please the boy for Christmas, to present Daniel something that will definitely make him happy. It should not be some faceless surprise like a set of sweets. Once Ethan found himself with his wife and son in a children's store. The baby was growing so fast, he needed to update his closet. While Margaret and Mason wandered among the clothing departments, Ethan strolled by the racks of toys. There were robots and interactive animals and sets for creativity. The eyes were scattered, and then the man's eyes fell on a big box, a young architect's constructor, sets of blocks from which you can assemble fanciful constructions. There was even decor, tiny shrubs, trees, parts for fountains, and the like interesting little things. Ethan remembered Daniel's words that he liked to invent interesting buildings and realized that this constructor was just made for a young, talented patient. The price, of course, was a biting price, but his wife smilingly approved of her husband's decision, and they bought this brightly colored box. What joy Daniel's eyes lit up when Ethan presented him with the gift. It was the day before Christmas, after the doctor had given the post to the morning shift. Ethan would spend the holiday with his family, but afterward, he would be sure to bring Daniel and his ward roommates treats from the holiday table. Margaret has prepared enough for the whole hospital. Now Daniel spent his mornings and evenings constructing. He turned out really impressive constructions, ergonomic, stylish, aesthetically pleasing. The boy was sure to write down each model in a scrapbook, then dismantle the building and build a new, even more original and interesting. By the time he was discharged, the boy had several albums of such drawings. Ethan once borrowed them and showed them at the Design Center, a prestigious institution where children were taught the basics of architectural design. Classes in the studio were expensive. Students participated in all sorts of competitions and won prizes. But Daniel was ready to accept for free, just to get such a talented student. Ethan explained the situation, said that the boy was brought up in an orphanage, that no one would promote him, let alone pay for his education and trips to competitions. The director thanked him and promised that he would fix everything, because such talent should not go to waste. Ethan left the Design Center with a light heart. It looked like Daniel was seriously interested in this place. You bet, the boy clearly has a rare gift, and the prestigious institution needs more victories. Daniel will definitely provide them. Now the boy will develop professionally in the right direction. Ethan couldn't wait to tell the teenager about everything. He would be happy. His life would no longer be the same. Daniel was happy, of course, but as the discharge approached, he became sadder and sadder. He didn't want to leave the hospitable wards where he was treated so well. Ethan was also sorry to part with Daniel, as he had grown attached to him during that time. He even had a serious talk with Margaret about taking a boy from the orphanage. Daniel was good, bright, kind, and would be a pleasure to take care of Mason. Ethan was really ready to take Daniel into the family, to become a father, a mentor. Why not? But Margaret was adamantly opposed. Are you crazy? We need to feed our own. Where else can we get another one, especially one so grown up? We probably won't even get one. The apartment is small. The wages are small too. Ethan sighed, of course. His wife was right, but Daniel wouldn't be lost now. Everything will be fine for him. On the eve of discharge, the doctor and the patient had a long conversation. They were sitting in the nurse's lounge, drinking tea with Ethan's favorite candies. The kid appreciated them too. The man tried to set the boy up for a new life, to inspire him. He talked about how important it was for him to work, to develop his talent. He left Daniel his phone number and asked him to call if he had any difficulties. Daniel nodded and smiled, but his eyes were sad and sorrowful. You'll be gone in the morning. Your shift will be over, so we don't have another opportunity to talk, the boy said. Yes, Ethan nodded. You'll be discharged without me. I'm so grateful to you, the boy said, looking seriously into the doctor's eyes. I know you saved my life. Well, I was just doing my job. Ethan shrugged. You did a good job, you made it. Not on my own. I know all about it, Daniel admitted quietly. Tears welled up in his eyes. I should have died. I heard the nurses talking, and you saved me twice. The first time was the night I arrived, when you sat next to my bed and noticed in time that I wasn't feeling well. I was with my eyes closed, but I felt everything, understood everything, knew that you were near me. I was so afraid you'd leave, but you were called many times to rest, but you didn't leave. So you felt everything then. I thought you were unconscious. No, I was conscious, but I just didn't have any energy. It was so hard, so scary, I thought I was dying. I was dying, but you didn't leave me for a minute and saved me, helped me at the right moment. It's a miracle I was there for you. Ethan confessed. Everything really could have ended horribly, but I'm a doctor. It's my duty to save the sick. You just couldn't be left behind. But someone else would have. Exercised Daniel, and Ethan didn't bother to argue because the kid was right. It was true that a doctor was not obliged to sit at the bedside of a patient in intensive care all night, especially when the condition had been stabilized, but the man felt. With his animal instinct that Daniel should not be left alone at that moment, not at all. But that's not all, the boy continued. I know all this. You bought me that expensive medicine with your own money, and without it I wouldn't exist. But where did you get this information from? The doctor was surprised. Well, I wouldn't want to reveal my sources, but okay. Just promise me that you won't scold anyone. Do I look like a scolder to you? You don't. You're just the opposite. But then you'll have to come clean. Clara blurted it out while she was changing my IVs. She told me. She even cried then. She was so moved by your kindness. Ethan sighed. Clara, information about the financial side of the case, and even more so about Daniel being on the verge of death, was not for children's ears. Thank you. I owe you my life? Without thinking about it. Ethan asked softly. That's what adults owe you. You're a child. You have rights. You have the right to learn, to be safe, to live, to be treated. Adults owe it all to their children, and you've had a hard time, but you can't be in a bad place forever, can you? Your life's gonna change now. You're gonna study. You'll definitely get noticed. Everything will be fine. Just don't get sick. Don't be lazy. Work, develop. It's a deal. Daniel smiled. Ethan ruffled his blonde hair. That's it. I have to make my evening rounds of the intensive care units. See if there's anyone in urgent need of help. Have a good night's work. Daniel got up from his chair and was about to leave, but at the door he turned around and said, I'll save you too someday. You'll see we'll meet again, and I'll help you in some way for sure. Go to bed already, you lifeguard. Ethan smiled. You don't owe me anything. I was just doing my job, and if you want to thank me, become a successful, wealthy man and help those who are weaker than you. Deal. Daniel nodded seriously and walked out. Good kid. Ethan thought then. Kind, grateful. May he be lucky in life. That was their last meeting before he was discharged. The next time Ethan came to work, Daniel was gone, back at the orphanage. The doctor sincerely hoped that the boy's life would change now, that the director of the design center had managed to reach an agreement with the administration of the orphanage, and Daniel would study in the best institution in the city. The boy certainly deserved it. It's been 15 years. During this time, a lot of things happened in Ethan's life. There were victories and failures at work. The same could be said about his personal life. Ethan and Margaret had a second child, a daughter, Susan. Living in a 2-room apartment became cramped, but there was no money to buy a new apartment. Margaret reproached her husband that he could not part with his hospital and find a better-paid job. All the days in the department, I am alone with the children in the house, so at least bring money, but that's how small things count. We do not see anything. My wife was almost sobbing. Ethan did not even try to argue. There was nothing to object. Margaret is right, but the man could not do anything. It was impossible to abandon the department. Ethan's heart ached for each patient. He did everything to make the percentage of recoveries grow steadily, and the number of medical failures tended to zero. Only not everything was in his hands. Funding was not enough. It was high time to make repairs on the floor, and the equipment needed to be updated because the XI century was upon us, and they were still using prehistoric devices. Ethan had raised the issue many times at meetings, but it had no effect. There were always more important objects that required urgent injection of funds. "Yes, your ward is fine for now," assured the head doctor. "There in cardiology the roof leaks, and in orthopedics wiring sparked, almost had a fire. Our X-ray machine does not see gross pathologies. The equipment is all old. The walls are shabby, covered with mold. For pulmonology patients, it's dangerous, very dangerous." "Ethan, come on. Can't you see the state of the other wards? It's not the time." Ethan did not give up, submitted applications, wrote to the city administration and the mayor's office, but in response he received either a refusal or empty responses, or even silence. The case has not moved for several years, and one day Ethan called the chief physician to his office. "Well, what happened? Something from the realm of the fantastic." He said cryptically, "What?" Ethan didn't understand. "Well, you've been writing everywhere you can, tried to get funding for the department." "Yeah. Knocked on every door." "I did." "Well, I got through. We've got a sponsor who wants to fund a renovation of the pulmonology department and buy modern equipment for diagnostics, treatment, and rehabilitation." Wow! Ethan couldn't believe his ears. He had long since resigned himself to the fact that his actions were having no effect, and now this. This mysterious patron is asking us for an estimate. I mean, a list of the work, the equipment needed, and so on, to see how much money we need. I'll get to the report right away. Ethan had already started to make a list of the necessary items in his mind, and he couldn't wait to get it down on paper. A worrying thought crept into his head. What if the sponsor changed his mind, or even turned out to be a mistake? This whole situation looked too improbable and even magical. "Don't be modest," the head doctor advised. "Write everything you need and even more, and if they tell you to moderate your ardor, then we'll do it." Ethan wasn't being modest. He wasn't asking for himself. He was asking for the patients. With the help of modern medical equipment, they would be able to save more lives, and in renovated wards, without whitewash and mold on the walls, it would be much easier and more pleasant to recover. To the surprise of Ethan and the head doctor, the sponsor took into account all the wishes and immediately transferred the necessary amount to the hospital account, even without haggling and asking unnecessary questions. On the floor, the repair began. Temporarily, Ethan, his colleagues, and patients had to move to another wing, but it was a pleasant hassle because the department was transforming before our eyes, and almost every day delivered boxes to the warehouse with domestic and imported equipment, the highest quality, the most modern. The renovation was over quickly. Ethan was once again convinced that money solves everything, or almost everything. After the work the department shone with white walls and ceilings, unpleasant odors of mustiness and dampness disappeared. Even being here became more pleasant. And the equipment? Ethan couldn't get enough of the new medical equipment. It was a whole new thing. Now they would be able to turn around. Now the patients would recover faster and easier. The man was heartily grateful to the mysterious sponsor. He wanted to talk to him personally, but the man preferred to remain anonymous. The rich have their own quirks, divorced the chief physician. Our benefactor is in disguise, but what are his reasons? Maybe he sinned a lot while he was building up his capital, and now he's making amends. What do we care about that? We care about the result. Ethan could not agree with the words of the chief. He wanted to thank the sponsor personally, to explain how many lives he had saved by his deed, but the patron of the arts did not want to reveal his identity. Well, his right, of course, but it all seemed very strange to Ethan. At work, the man's soul rested. Fresh repairs, new equipment, all this inspired, lifted his spirits, but at home things were not going so well as he would have liked. Moneyless, not that they were poor at all, Ethan's salary even allowed Margaret not to work. They both made that choice when their daughter was born. His wife would stay at home and take care of the children, and he, the head of the family, would be the sole provider. Margaret honestly fulfilled her duties. The children studied on excellent. The house was always clean and cozy and smelled delicious food. But the role of a provider didn't work out so well. Ethan tried, took part-time jobs, went out to work off the clock, but there was still not enough money for the kind of life Margaret wanted. No, she didn't demand anything supernatural, but she wanted to give her children a decent education, to vacation at sea at least once a year, to drive a new car, not a rusty and constantly breaking down. Ethan could not provide all this for his family, worried, tried to do something, but it did not work. The option of quitting the hospital was not considered at all. It was his department, his brainchild. Under him, it began to flourish, and now, thanks to him, the department became the most modern in the hospital. But Margaret, too, she could understand. Scandals, quarrels, recriminations increased, but Ethan tolerated it. He had nothing to say to his frustrated wife. Mason and Susan grew up. They were no longer babies, but teenagers requiring much more investment, including financial. Mason took an interest in programming, searching for videos on the internet and creating amazing projects with their help. Margaret and Ethan marveled when their son showed them the results of his labor, but they themselves were far from the IT world. He needs to learn. Margaret insisted. He's clearly got a knack for it. He's a real talent. Yeah, good for him. He's a determined kid growing up. Only we parents can kill that talent at the root. What's that? I don't get it, Ethan. The boy must learn. And do you know how much a programming course costs? I just found out we can't afford it. Well, that's too bad, but maybe there's something cheaper. You can't. I called all such institutions in our city, and online schools even looked for. Everywhere the price is about the same, and it is not for us. I'll figure something out. You better try. It's our child's future we're talking about. It's in our hands right now. Imagine the responsibility. Ethan knew Margaret was overreacting. Well, nothing would happen if Mason didn't study at these expensive courses. The boy was doing a lot himself, and he was doing well. And when the time came, he would enter a university, become a student to study to be a professional programmer, and all these circles. Ethan had the feeling that they were nothing more than a way to siphon money from ambitious parents. But the man did not argue with Margaret. She reacted painfully to all financial issues, especially if it also affected the children. One of his colleagues gave Ethan a great idea. It turns out that in their city, there is a free school for young programmers. It is an institution of the state. Graduates receive a certificate giving them permission to work, but to get there, you have to pass entrance tests. It seems to have strong teachers, innovative programs, modern equipment, but they take only the most promising ones. Ethan immediately called the school and signed Mason up for testing. On the appointed day, he took a short leave from work and drove his son to the interview. Mason was worried. The boy really wanted to get on the enrollment list, hoped, made plans. Ethan was encouraging the child. The man was really confident of success. Mason is so enthusiastic. He's been studying a lot. He already knows a few things. Who else to take but him? Mason was tested, told to look at the results in 2 days on the website. After the allotted time, Ethan called Margaret and told her in a distraught voice that their son's name wasn't on the list. She even called the school to find out if there was a mistake, and it was confirmed that Mason had fallen a few points short. They had advised her to study and try to get in next year. Ethan was upset, of course. He thought it was a done deal, but he spoke to his wife in a deliberately cheerful voice. Well, nothing, he's still a young guy. There's time. He'll have time to study. He'll improve his math and English, and then... You don't understand anything. Margaret was indignant. While he's standing here, his peers are moving ahead, and he'll never catch up with them. Do you understand? Never. And you can't pay for a programming course. You're ruining your son's future. After the conversation with Margaret, Ethan walked sad and pensive for a long time. More and more often, she reproached him for not earning enough. It was hard to look like such a lowlife in the eyes of his wife, and the children heard it all too. Here Ethan was distracted, the man was at work, and here he is an important and irreplaceable person, and very respected. His opinion and help is needed by someone all the time. No important medical decision is made without him. Ethan went about his usual business, and then, about a week after the incident with the programming school, a strange and very unexpected event happened. Ethan got a call from the school. The administrator informed him as politely as possible that there were a few more budget places on the course, and since Mason had shown high results on the test, he would be enrolled. They asked him to come with documents and fill out some paperwork. Ethan, of course, immediately called his wife back. Margaret was over the moon. The man smiled, imagining how happy Mason himself would be. Some time later, the problem with the salary was solved quite unexpectedly. The city announced a contest for Doctor of the Year. For the first time in my life, it had never happened before. And from the hospital, the head physician nominated Ethan as a contestant. The man tried to resist. He did not like such events, but the chief insisted, saying that the candidate for the head of the pulmonology department, chosen by voting on the hospital's website, patients favored him. They also wrote explanatory comments. Ethan didn't know that there was any voting, but it was very pleasant to read the patients' comments. Once again, the man felt that his work was seen, valued, and appreciated. The most important thing is that during this time they managed to save many lives. No money can measure that, and then the work spun again. Ethan didn't think about the contest. Filled out some form, submitted a photo. Someone from the hospital administration handled the rest. After a while, Ethan was summoned to his office by the head doctor and asked in a mysterious voice if he had a business suit. "Well, I did," Ethan shrugged. "Why?" "Because you're the winner of the contest." The head doctor's eyes were burning. If only such an honor for the hospital. Now it will be easier to get funding from the budget and the long-awaited repair of some departments. I did nothing to win. Ethan, who had forgotten all about the contest, stretched out in confusion. He couldn't believe it was true. You didn't do anything to win the contest, but you did more important things, working, giving of yourself to patients, saving people. That's why you won. At the awards ceremony, Ethan came in glowing Margaret, his wife holding his hand. She looked gorgeous in a dress with an open back, specially purchased for the occasion. Ethan also looked good in the elegant suit he had last worn 5 years ago for the wedding of his wife's younger brother. He was called to the stage. Ethan was a little confused in the spotlight, but as his friends and colleagues told him later, It looked very appropriate, and the Doctor of the Year was not bad at all. It turns out that when you stand on the stage, because of the bright light, you can hardly see the audience hall. It seems dark and boundless sea. Ethan felt the eyes on himself, felt the energy of the audience, but did not see them. Such a strange feeling. And then there was a banquet, at which the tipsy, cheerful head doctor announced important news. It turned out that the winner of the contest would receive a monthly supplement to his salary from the budget, and named such an amount that Margaret shrieked with joy and Ethan smiled. No longer would he feel like a man who could not provide a decent life for his family. Ethan had often wondered if fate had favored him in some special way lately. He always thought that life was striped. The black stripes would be replaced by white ones and vice versa, but his phase of success and rise was not over. One success followed another. It certainly pleased, inspired, made him feel strong and almost omnipotent, but also caused a strange feeling. Is everything really working out so well? Was it somehow suspicious in itself? Wouldn't there be a reckoning one day? Ethan tried to chase such thoughts away, but occasionally they still seeped in and kept the man at peace. And now it was completely idyllic at home. The family had finally moved into a new, larger apartment, closer to the gymnasium where the children were studying. The couple even had time to make repairs, but how to do? Ethan simply paid for the services of workers, and while the whole family vacationed at the sea, the team turned the apartment with rough finishing into a stylish, beautiful dwelling. True, we had to constantly communicate with the repairman on Skype, to accept the work, to give instructions, but it was a very pleasant hassle. My wife was delighted, but Mason with some sadness remembered how he liked to make repairs in their old apartment when they, as a team, painted the walls themselves, glued wallpaper, and then a long time to clean up and remove construction waste. As it turns out, these actions gave the children a special pleasure. Ethan's life had changed a lot. He didn't even notice when it started, but now everything was completely different. He worked in a state-of-the-art department. His son was studying at a prestigious programming school. They now had a spacious new apartment. As for money, of course, they were not millionaires, but now they did not have to save on food, clothes, entertainment, and it was just wonderful. But probably, Ethan thought too often that everything could not be so smooth and good in life, and waited for some kind of payback or black streak, but he didn't believe in this happy fairy tale, where all the problems were solved as if by themselves. That evening, Ethan returned from the hospital late. His shift was over at 6 p.m., but he had to stay late, a complicated patient of uncertain prospects. Ethan couldn't leave him until he knew exactly what was wrong. And now, at almost midnight, he was driving along a half-empty country highway, so it was faster than looping through the city, and the route itself was easier, no traffic lights or crosswalks. I could relax a little, which is very helpful when I was in the hospital for 10 hours in a row. It was raining. The drops were drumming on the roof, smashing beautifully against the windshield. The wipers barely coped with their task. I could hardly wait to get home to warmth and comfort. Surely Margaret must have cooked something delicious. Now he was always greeted by a satisfied, smiling wife, not an irritated woman with anxious eyes. A marvelous metamorphosis. And then there was a noise, a rumble, a squeal of brakes, and a strong, powerful, unexpected blow. It came from the right. Ethan felt that he was losing control. He twisted the steering wheel to the right, but it was inexorably carried to the left into the ditch. The car spun. Everything was happening fast. The man saw the sky and the earth change places before his eyes, making him nauseous. Ethan hit the roof and the side windows of the car, but somehow he felt no pain. He wished this fall and his surroundings would end sooner, to get out on solid ground where there was no jolt. Finally, the car came to a stop. Ethan realized that he was trapped in a crumpled car, which had fallen into a ditch with the roof down. The situation was made worse by the fact that a fire was starting. Ethan first smelled a distinctive odor, and then flames appeared as they quietly flared up in the back of the car, but it didn't take long for the fire to spread throughout the cabin. Ethan was bombarded with a wave of terror. There was a need for action. The man tried to free himself, but it was useless. The belt held tight, the doors were jammed, and his hands were not obeying well for some reason. They're strangely sticky and slippery. It's blood. Where's it coming from? Okay, he'll figure it out later. If there is one, it's later. Ethan tried to break the window with what he could find, his son's plastic tube. Of course, he really realized that he was unlikely to succeed, but something had to be done. At the same time, the man loudly called for help. People should see the accident. They would help him. The cabin was quickly filling with smoke. The fire was gaining strength. The characteristic crackle of the flames of the fire eating its food could be heard. A disheveled boy, very young, came to the car. He bent down, made sure that there was a living person in the cabin, tried to open the jammed door, saw the flames. The boy's eyes rounded with fear, and he bounced away to a safe distance. Ethan realized, frightened, realizing what could happen any minute. The boy called for the rescue team, shouting into the phone, his voice breaking, begging them to go faster, but Ethan realized they wouldn't make it. With little time to spare, the man struggled to free himself. He has a life to live, he has children, a wife, he has a job and patients who can't do without him. It was getting harder and harder to breathe. Ethan realized that it was because of the smoke. Soon he would lose consciousness and probably would not even feel anything, but he would lose the opportunity to fight for life. The men joined in. He managed to spot someone else. Someone ran up to the burning car, smashing the windshield. Ethan felt a hail of small shards smashing his face. Or maybe this was all just a hallucination. Strong hands reached out, for the driver wedged between the seat and the dashboard. Then darkness came, saving, calm, impenetrable. Ethan opened his eyes. He had to squeeze his eyes shut. The white walls, the bright light, all of it blinding, preventing him from looking around properly. There was a distinctive beeping sound. Very familiar, there's no mistaking it. He's in the intensive care ward. Maybe even in his own hospital, but in a different ward. Ethan remembered that he had been in an accident, in a burning car, his seat pressed firmly against the dashboard. There was almost no chance of rescue. Did they get him out? Did the rescue team get there in time? Miracles! Then another very important question arose. And what condition was he in? Apparently not in the best condition, since he was in intensive care, and at the same time his head was thinking clearly, which meant that his brain was not particularly damaged. Ethan opened his eyes again. This time he managed to look around. He was alone in the room. Life support equipment was connected to him. He was as he should be without clothes, lying under a thin white sheet. Ethan tried to move his arms, and his legs were working. The man lifted himself slightly and looked under the sheet, his feet bandaged, a few bandages on his body, but everything in place. It looked like things might not be so bad. A familiar nurse entered the room. Ethan had seen her many times in the corridors. They had said hello, but unfortunately he didn't know her name. When the nurse saw that the patient was awake, she smiled happily. "Ethan, are you with us? What a joy! Would you please call James?" Ethan asked. his voice sounding hoarse, somehow weak. He needed to talk to James, the head of the trauma department, and find out about his condition. He felt a little dizzy, a little sore in places, but overall Ethan didn't feel like staying in the ICU. He wanted to go to a regular room. Sure. The nurse nodded and ran for the chief. James arrived promptly, smiling broadly and looking at his colleague, who had been turned into a patient, with obvious relief. Well, what can I say? You were born with your shirt on. You were hit on the highway by an SUV that lost control. The kid behind the wheel was a kid who just got his license yesterday, showing off for his girl. He's fine, but you'll see. All right, he'll get his. Ethan remembered the confused boy who had called the rescue team, begging them to hurry. That must be the one responsible for the accident. For some reason, Ethan didn't feel any anger or even irritation at the character. There was so much fear, despair, remorse in the boy's eyes at that moment. So I was rescued by the rescue team? Did they make it in time? There was a car on fire, not a lifeguard. Rescuer, your guardian angel. A young man was driving down the road, saw the accident. He pulled you right out of the burning car, even though he realized that any minute now something terrible could happen. He didn't hesitate, broke the glass with a fire extinguisher, knocked down the flames a little, freed you from the seat belts with a knife, unfastened the metal with his hands. Just a little bit, but it was enough to pull you out. Your legs were scratched, but it's nothing. And the main thing was not confused and took the fire extinguisher and the knife when he rushed to the rescue. I want to see him. Ethan said, that man. He saved my life at the risk of his own. Yes, he'll come again. James promised. He's sure to, because he calls every day to check on your condition, as often as your relatives do. Every day? How long have I been unconscious? Yeah, almost a week. We were afraid you'd slip into a coma. Sometimes it's hard to know how much brain damage there is, and you were still swollen, but luckily it was okay. I went over the edge a few times. Does Margaret know I'm okay? Well, don't be too quick about it. You've got a lot of healing to do. But I called your wife as soon as I was told. She's probably flying all the way down here by now. Ethan had a lot of time to think at the hospital. The man who had saved him was not out of his mind. He knew they were bound to meet someday, but how can you thank someone who did such a thing for you? At the risk of his own life. Soon Ethan was transferred from the intensive care unit to a regular ward, but as a regular ward, to a separate room reserved for VIP patients. The man might have been more than happy to be with the other patients, to have someone to talk to. But James insisted on special conditions for the honored guest. Ethan didn't like being a patient, and the forced idleness was a burden. Probably that was why his recovery was going at a fast pace. The doctor wanted to get back to work, to his favorite business. His colleagues visited him, reported news, brought him treats. Margaret and her children appeared almost every day. The family realized that Ethan might not have died that night. There was even more chance of that than of being saved. The accident gave the relationship a special shade, united the spouses. In Margaret's eyes, there was more love, tenderness, and it was pleasant, very pleasant. The mysterious savior did not appear. Ethan tried to find out about him from the policeman who came to take statements, asked his colleagues who had received him that fateful night, and even asked questions of the man who had caused the accident, the same kid who had come to him once to apologize. Shy, modest, nervous, with a weight of guilt on his fragile shoulders, but even this one could not say anything about the Savior, except that he drove up in an Infiniti and acted very quickly and decisively. He didn't just save you, he saved me. Without looking Ethan in the eye, the boy said, If something had happened to you, something irreparable, I don't know how I would have lived with it. So if you see him, give him a big thank you from me." One day, the mysterious benefactor showed up on his own. James himself came by to warn Ethan. "Well, get ready. Here comes our hero." For some reason, he said in a whisper to a patient, a colleague, "Will you tell me later what's going on?" James left the room, and after a minute, the door was created, and a young man entered it with a broad step. A wide white-toothed smile on his face, intelligent eyes, slightly wavy blonde hair, stylish, trim, some kind of radiant or what? Judging by his springy gait and muscles, visible even under his shirt, he is engaged in some kind of sport. That's why he managed to pull the victim out of the burning car. Moments later, Ethan noticed a detail that struck him to the core. The rescuer was holding a box of candy, his favorite. Once Ethan used to adore these sweets, but then the candy seems to have been discontinued. At least they had disappeared from the market. Where did this man find the box? And most importantly, how does he know that Ethan adores them and misses his favorite treat? It's just too weird to be a coincidence. "Hello." The visitor smiled, friendly and very, very warmly. "Afternoon." Ethan eyed his savior, someone he reminded him of. Perhaps they had met before. It's quite possible. You know who I am? Of course, you're the one who saved my life." "Yes, I did. Whether it was an accident or not, who knows? But it was you who saved my life. You did it first." "What?" Ethan was trying to remember where he'd seen this man before. "I don't understand." "You don't remember?" The young man concluded and smiled. "That's not surprising. The last time I saw you was when I was just a kid. Daniel?" Ethan suddenly realized. How could he not have realized? The eyes, the hair, the intonation. Of course. "Daniel, is that really you?" "Yeah. Remember I promised I'd save you someday. You see, I kept my word. Tell me, what happened to you then after you were discharged?" Ethan asked. He was really interested in the fate of this orphanage boy, whom he had once seriously thought of taking into the family to bring up as a son. It turned out that Daniel was accepted to study at the very design center, where Ethan went to bother about him. Here, the boy's talent was immediately noticed and appreciated. With him engaged in the best teachers, his work was sent to all sorts of competitions, where they steadily took prizes. Daniel gained a certain popularity. Thanks to this, he was somehow respected in the orphanage. By the end of school, Daniel received several offers from the best architectural universities in the country. These institutions provided him with a dormitory and a scholarship just to get the coveted student. Daniel chose New York. Teachers from the Design Center, which had time for years of study to become a boy, almost native, said that there he has a better chance of success, and so it turned out. While still a student, Daniel became an employee of one of the largest architectural firms in the country. He started earning so much that within a year, he was able to save up for his own apartment, and then more. Daniel graduated from university and became the head of his department. His life changed completely. Money, expensive things, trips to expensive resorts. Daniel did not deny himself anything, and it was just wonderful. But most importantly, the guy was doing what he loved, what he really did well. Daniel enjoyed both the work and the result and felt really happy. Daniel never for a moment forgot about the person who first showed him concern. He knew perfectly well that Ethan had saved him twice, the first time on the night of admission, when he had refused to leave the bedside of a heavy patient and had noticed a seizure in time. The second time, the man had spent all his savings on medication for the orphaned orphan. Without expensive medication, Daniel would not have made it. The guy was clearly aware of this, but the doctor did not limit himself to the fulfillment of his official duties. He not only cured Daniel, not only gave him life, Ethan also believed in Daniel's talent and helped this gift to develop. Daniel still kept the construction kit he received from Ethan that Christmas. It was thanks to this set that the kid realized that architecture was really his calling. He spent hours and hours building amazing buildings, some of which he realized as an adult. I'm so happy for you, I really am. Ethan smiled. He looked at the young, confident man and couldn't believe it was Daniel, the same skinny teenager, abandoned, betrayed twice, wanted by no one. Joy and pride for Daniel, that's what Ethan felt as he looked at this man. Wow, he became such a successful architect, but most importantly, Daniel grew up kind, brave, determined, ready to help others. I always remembered about you and about my promise to help you, followed your fate. It seemed unfair to me that such a good man, a wonderful doctor, saving lives every day, lived like that. Daniel hesitated, afraid of offending his interlocutor, but Ethan smiled and finished the sentence. Lives in poverty. Well, almost. Wait, are you the mysterious sponsor who renovated my department? Yeah, nodded Daniel. I was literally pulled out of the grave in this ward once, and I wanted to thank you, especially since I have such an opportunity. It's my pleasure, really. Wow, I never would have guessed. Oh, and this Doctor of the Year contest, is that you too? Well, it's a state contest. I didn't invent it. And yet somehow you're involved in it. I can feel it. You've always had a very good intuition. Daniel smiled. Well, let's just say that I helped to get the contest organized in your town, and I asked the chief physician to nominate you. He said he was going to do it anyway, but I had nothing to do with you winning. I just gave my vote, the only one. The patients chose it themselves. I had no doubt it would work out that way. You are a wonderful doctor, humane, kind, not indifferent. This result is well-deserved. Wait, what about Mason, my son? I mean, the programming school. Did you have a hand in that too? Ethan was struck by a new hunch. I did my best there, I'll admit. Quid pro quo. You helped me get a job at the design center, and that gave me my way in life, and I also helped your wonderful son. He's a smart kid, just a couple points short of the competition. I paid for all the years of tuition and asked him to tell you that there were budget places available. Ethan looked at the young man in surprise and remembered him as a small boy, thin, big-eyed, pale, almost merging with the hospital bedclothes in color. Now he was a strong, healthy man, successful, brave, kind. But why did he act so secretive? Why didn't he contact me himself directly? Well, Daniel hesitated. It's just that I know you very well. It would be awkward for you to accept this help. Maybe you'd approve a sponsorship for the department, but for yourself, I doubt it. Ethan thought for a moment. Daniel was right. He would probably be genuinely happy for his former patient, but he would probably refuse to help. The doctor was used to helping himself, but he'd never learned to accept support. And then there was that incident, the terrible one with you, the accident, and this time. This time it really was a coincidence. Amazing, marvelous, just unbelievable. At the same time as Ethan was coming home from the hospital, Daniel was driving to visit, quite by chance, an orphanage friend. He had just flown from the capital to his hometown and was rolling down a country highway. The accident happened before his eyes. The SUV lost control and literally swept a light sedan into the ditch. Daniel slowly pressed the brake. His car smoothly slowed down. The young architect watched in horror as the damaged car flew downward, flipping over the roof. While I parked, while I grabbed the necessary things, while I ran to the place, there was a fire starting. It was impossible to slow down. The driver of the SUV tried to help, but he was having no luck. He called for rescuers, only they wouldn't make it in time. Daniel struggled to pull Ethan out. He was already unconscious. At that moment, the guy didn't recognize his old friend and savior. The victim's face was covered with blood, but then when the victim of the accident was already taken away, the police came to the scene. It turned out that in the glove compartment of the half-burned car, there were documents in the name of Ethan. I just couldn't believe it. Daniel shared his impressions. It turns out that I really saved you, as I promised years ago. I still thank fate that I was driving behind you at that moment. It's an amazing coincidence. I've been following your fate for several years. I've been by your side. I've secretly helped you in any way I could, and it always seemed like it wasn't enough, and then this. If it hadn't been for you, I wouldn't be here. Ethan nodded. He was reliving the horror of the accident again, the horrible images coming before his eyes one after another, and once again Ethan realized how close he had been to death. It was an amazing feeling. Now the man appreciated every moment of life even more. And again, Daniel continued, "If you hadn't saved me then, many years ago, if you hadn't sat by the bedside of the orphanage patient at night, if you hadn't spent all your money on expensive medicine, if you hadn't, after all, bothered with this design center, then you wouldn't have been gone at night either." Amazing paradox of fate. A life for a life, it turns out. Ethan and Daniel talked for hours on end. The doctor was interested in learning as much as he could about the life of his longtime patient and now savior. The guy lived in the capital 4 years ago. He and his wife had a daughter, and then they took twins, a boy and a girl, from an orphanage. In general, the couple helped orphanages and boarding schools a lot, both financially and as volunteers. I remembered what you told me then. Daniel smiled. That time before you were discharged. What do you mean? Ethan shared, but he couldn't remember his admonition. You asked me to grow up healthy, to become a successful person, and to help those who need help. See, I'm good at that. Yeah, you sure are. It turns out that Daniel then fell into the heart of the doctor's words, and his whole life he built, trying to follow this instruction. A complete stranger turned out to be kind and attentive to Daniel. The boy didn't know that such a thing could happen, but he liked it. He liked it very much. He realized that there are good people in the world, and since then, he dreamed of growing up and becoming strong, to be able to support those who are weaker. I remembered you all the time, remembered our conversations, your care. I knew exactly who I owed my success to. But that's where you're wrong. I just noticed your talent and showed your drawings to whoever needed them, nothing more. But you did it, Daniel insisted. Everyone in the hospital and the orphanage saw my drawings, but you were the only one who decided that this talent was worthy of attention. Daniel left, but it was clear that now they would communicate, go sometimes to visit each other, correspond. There was some kind of connection between them, an invisible thread. Is it a joke to save each other's lives at different stages of life? You can't think of such a thing on purpose. Ethan felt warm and calm. He hadn't felt so peaceful and happy for a long time.